Well, I want to dispel one myth that's out there about silver and being used in emergency situations. It can be. It can work just as good as cash, fiat, toilet paper, cash. Right, Putin? Just make sure you keep enough cat food on hand and don't forget about the critters, right? Forget about the furry people in an emergency. I have plenty of cat food for this guy. But I was listening to something. It was actually on Jeff Rentz. It was an interview he had with Andy Gause. It's Gause, Andy Gause. And he was in the Sandy Hook debacle in New Jersey, which could have been even worse. With all the flooding and all the looting that happened and, the breakdown of the entire system pretty much, at least temporarily in a lot of areas. But he said he was able to use silver. Now, this is like a 2-ounce block of silver, so I'm not even talking a coin. You can use silver in an emergency situation. He says the real trick was this. You don't deal with the big box stores. You deal with individual vendors. A lot of people just knew what it was. And I'm figuring, if they know about it in New Jersey, in the metropolitan area, they know about it everywhere else in the countryside in the United States where it's not as metropolitan or metro as New Jersey. Because the Sandy Hooks, when the hurricanes hit, Hurricane Sandy hit, it was in a big metropolitan area. And it's not something like people weren't thinking about survivalism and all this type of stuff. It turned out that they were able to use physical silver for money. It's just that it didn't work like in the big box clubs, Sam's Club or something like that, or Costco or Walmart, or some of the big supermarket chains out there, Pathway, which would be up there up north. But it did work. It did work. Actually, the individual vendors, they were able to deal with it fine. They knew what it was. So, for instance, say silver's about $24, $25. So this is 2 ounces. It's $50. It's $50. It will work as money in an emergency situation. And Andy Gause, I was listening to an interview he had with Jeff Rentz. He used his silver as money in a lot of situations, no problem. So, despite, actually a lot of people were saying, oh, the silver's no good, you have to go to it. No, people know. People know. It's like it just wasn't good in some of the big major retail stores. But, that's not everything. And actually the open currency standard is very well much alive in the New Jersey and New York area. There's actually a lot of individual stores that are accepting silver, like Lakota silver and that type of stuff, the ones that are deemed part of the American open currency standard. There's a lot of it going on in that area. A lot of times people don't realize, I know like in New Jersey, metropolitan New York area, it's kind of considered pretty liberal, almost like anti-constitutionalist in some ways, I guess you would say. But there's a lot of people, even though despite maybe the laws are pretty much that way and a majority kind of tend to go that way, there's still a very, very, very sizable amount of minority in New Jersey that are very constitutional and understand that silver is money. It is in a true sense. I mean, even though the central banks haven't recognized it, demonetized it since the 1800s, people still in New Jersey, a lot of people still recognize it as money. And it will function as money. Like, you got to figure this. I mean, if it's an emergency and, you have a hardware store or a hardware/garden store, you're not one of the big, box chains, you're not part of like Lowe's or Home Depot, and somebody comes up to you as a customer and they need to get some empty gas cans, and they say, well, I don't have any cash, but I have silver. As a merchant, would you accept that? You sure would, because you understand what it's worth. You understand it. Actually, this is probably more solid than the cash, even if it was a long-term emergency. I think it's just that when you're dealing with the very large established stores where every transaction has a parameter, like it has to have an electronic parameter involved with it, and the decision as to will we accept silver or not has to be made by a much higher authority in some corporate world located hundreds or maybe even a couple thousand miles away. You're not going to be able to deal with that type of store. But if you're actually dealing with the store, and it could be a large store, it could be a person, that has 2 or 3 stores in the area. They could be pretty, they could have a multi-million-dollar business, no problem. they will accept this type of stuff because you can actually talk to the upper management or the owners, and you will be able to deal with it. So in a situation where, say, all the banks were closed because of an electrical power failure due to a major storm or earthquake, silver can still function as money. It's just not going to function as money in some of the biggest stores out there that are just geared strictly towards and have policies that are set in place. But pretty much all the local vendors, you're not going to have a problem using silver. You can walk in there with a hunk of silver like this, and guess what? You would be able to trade with this, no problem. So that is something I heard on the internet about. You had to have paper cash in an emergency. That is not true. You can actually get gasoline for silver, same type of price. People know what it's worth. Actually, if I was dealing in this situation and I had, all this food, and the people wanted to buy the food from me, and I knew the situation was only going to last a week or two, I wouldn't be taking paper cash for food. I personally would rather be taking silver for food. In my situation, I would definitely rather have the silver than the paper cash. And I'm talking at whatever the spot price is, 24, 25, or whatever it happens to be. I would actually rather take the silver, no problem. So, I think that's just exactly how anybody who's like a business owner that is actually hits his business right there in that city, he will take silver for a transaction. They know what it's worth. It's just the only people you're going to have a problem with are like the big, international box office, big box store chains like Walmart, Costco, Sam's Club, Publix, Pathway, Safeway, whatever, that type of things, because nobody's going to be able to make a decision at the local level to take silver for the products. But anybody that's dealing in any kind of like store there, garden store or hardware store, or some type of tractor supply or mechanical type store or something, whatever, they sell things to garages or something, they'll take silver. They will, because they can make the decision right there on the spot. The owner management is right there on the spot, and they know what it is. And that is exactly what occurred during Hurricane Sandy. People were able to use silver for goods. And I was listening to an interview on Andy Gauss, but it makes a lot of sense. I don't think he's lying about this or anything. It makes a lot of sense. The places that would not accept the silver, where you'd have a problem, is like the very, very big stores, because it would have to be a decision made at a management that, further away. But any individual store owner that was around in that area, they understood what silver was for and what it's worth. And they would readily accept it as money for payment of something. So it will work in an emergency. Don't let them fool you. It will work in an emergency. And I could say, if I had extra food, if I wanted to sell extra food, I would much rather take silver for it than fiat cash. I would definitely rather take silver for it, no doubt about it.